Let's start at 30.
You are? Yeah, it's been a week.
1, 2, this is a test. Okay, I'm Dorothée Dupuis. I'm a French curator. I live in Mexico since a year, and I am organizing, with the help of Polina Stroganova, here present, and the team of material, and of course our fabulous panel of speakers. I'm proposing then during 3 days a series of talk during Material Art Fair, trying to discuss the current place of Mexico City and its artistic scene on a national, regional, international level. As you can notice, I speak in English. The 2 next panels, tomorrow and the day after, are going to be in Spanish. But for today, it's going to be in English because it's easier. But feel free to ask for translation to this young lady there if you need a helmet, if you're not comfortable in this. Voilà. So thank you for coming. I would like to just tell you a few words and about the whole conference series. It was entitled 20 million Mexicans Can Be Wrong. It was a quote from a show of 2002 created by Mexican curator Cuauhtemoc Medina. And I chose to entitle this series this way because this title was already a quote of a Corona beer advertising slogan from the 40s, which was of course already announcing the preponderance place of Mexico within a larger continental and international level. So this is in this sense that Cuauhtemoc used it in 2002, and on another meta level, it was interesting also to see where is now a Mexican curator like Cuauhtemoc, who's totally recognized on an international level, as he curated last year Manifesta, and he's also the director of one of the Mexican most prominent institution, the MUAC. So I thank you again for coming. The talk should durate approximately an hour, and feel free to ask questions after. And I will leave the speech to Polina Stroganova, who will introduce you the thematic of the talk and the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dorothée. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Polina, and I'm an independent curator and writer based here in Mexico City. Today we're going to discuss the topic, is Mexico City a new Berlin? Which of course is some sort of a question, but also a critical take on about how or what's actually happening there. How do certain centers, artistic centers like Berlin, or maybe now even Mexico City, arise? And what about certain quality labeling that's happening? For example, if you say, well, I'm an artist who currently lives and works in Berlin, that somehow guarantees a certain quality. What actually makes such center as Berlin so attractive? And what about Mexico City, and how can Mexico City position itself within these international centers like Berlin, London, New York, Paris, etc., etc.? And I'm very thankful to have 3 wonderful speakers with me today: Pedro Reyes, Chris Sharp, and Sophie Goltz. Pedro Reyes is an internationally renowned artist based here in Mexico City, born in Mexico City, based here. He is shown in Reina Sofia and Cuauhtemoc, in the Venice Biennale, and worldwide, and is represented by London galleries, of course, also a gallery here in Mexico City, and has been operating, so can give us a great introduction into how he has been working here in Mexico City, and also make a comparison to his international activities. On the other hand, there is Chris Sharp, who is an independent curator and writer based here in Mexico City as well, but he also spent quite some time in Europe and also in Berlin. He's the co-founder of the project space Lulu, which is based here in Mexico City and has a beautiful booth over here. And but besides that, he's also curating shows all over the world and writes for several art magazines. And then there's Sophie Goltz, who came here especially for actually that talk series. We're very thankful, from Berlin. She currently is the chief curator for art and public space in Hamburg and Berlin. She has worked as a curator for one of the major art institutions in Berlin, NBK, for several years. She worked for Documenta 12 and has also contributed to the Berlin Biennale. So thank you very much for coming. And I will start with some questions to Pedro. Who, since you have really lived here and decided to actually start and build your artistic career in Mexico City, I would like to ask you what you feel makes Mexico City attractive as an art production space.
Thank you. Well, I love Mexico City, and I found it a place that is extremely welcoming for foreigners, and also we always feel like very flattered that anyone is like willing to come, and we immediately want to make family with them. I think it's like a kind of idiosyncratic aspect of Mexico's culture, I believe. But also, the curious thing is that there's many factors that I believe that make Mexico like a good place for an artist to live and work. That is, that, you know, like it's not like an extremely large place where you get lost like New York or London, etc. Or it's not so small. And it's also, so you know, there's always, I was actually like trying to make an inventory of spaces of contemporary art in Mexico. So I was thinking, and actually I would like to actually kind of launch a collective exercise, and because people may help me, but for instance, if we start counting, let's say that we say how many museums are, no? Like let's say MOAC, Jumex, Carrillo Gil, San Ildefonso, Museo de Arte Moderno, Tamayo, El Chopo, Casa del Lago, Ex Teresa, Laboratorio Alameda, there's 10. And then we say, for instance, Casa Vecina, there's other spaces that do some other kind of activities like Liga or Archivo, El Faro de Oriente. You need to help me.
El Eco.
Which one? Siqueiros, El Eco, el Museo de la Ciudad de México,
Muca Roma.
Muca Roma, no. Centro Cultural de España.
Museo Antropológico.
But it has to be like contemporary, that have a contemporary art program. No, we said that already. And Aguacali has a contemporary arts program. That's 20. But we have, let's see if we can make more. Which others?
Anahuacalli.
El Carrillo?
No.
Oh, no. Which one?
Riviera Anahuacalli.
Yeah, we said that already.
Alumnos 47.
Alumnos 47, Soma.
Centro de la Imagen.
Centro de la Imagen. That's 23. Let's reach at least 25. Which one other you think that there's around? That has a contemporary art program. The Siqueiros, we said that already. San Ildefonso? Yes.
Casa Azul.
Casa Azul, de Frida. They have contemporary art programs? Yes? Okay, well, I believe that there's at least 25 institutions that are non-commercial, that have constantly like a program of contemporary, modern and contemporary art, but more contemporary art that, well, for instance, like just across the street, Bellas Artes, no? Yeah. So there's, for instance, like for a city that has like 25 institutions with contemporary art programs, I believe that there may be less than 10 cities in the world that have as many, you know, like, and probably we would be like, I don't know, like perhaps number 6 or number 7. Of, you know, how many cities in, I don't know, in Europe have like 25 spaces, I don't know. 150 non-profits? No, but like yes, exactly. But for contemporary art, not including galleries. Okay, so well, we still have to work more. Yes, but in this continent, we're not so bad. Yes, well, I don't know. I'm speaking for so long that maybe we give this chance to anyone.
Well, maybe actually Sophie can now, I'm going to change my original program, but since we are now kind of in this comparison debate, maybe it would be actually nice to get a little insight on facts, because I think what's very interesting about this discussion, on the one hand is of course Mexico City, but on the other hand is kind of that phenomena that Berlin became this incredible art hype phenomena in the world over the last years, and I think it would be interesting to analyze that and see what are actually facts about Berlin, what's really happening there, and what are myths, and how are certain mechanisms, hype mechanisms created, and maybe Sophie can break things a little bit down to earth for us.
Okay, so I'm the downer. So it's an interesting role. Okay, first of all, I would like to say thank you to the organizers and to Polina for organizing this panel. And when I was invited, I mean, I've been living in Berlin since 1995, so I'm quite of an old generation, so to say, in Berlin. Yeah, when I was invited, and I found the question quite strange in the very first place. So how can you compare Berlin and Mexico City? And I know Mexico City from other visits, so I thought, okay, how could you do that? And then I thought, okay, it's true in a way that you could maybe see how a certain art scene emerges. What are the reasons, as you were describing it, for people to be here, to come here, to make or to think of a career in Mexico City? So what are the conditions? And this is probably what maybe we talk about it in Berlin today. And I thought before I start talking about Berlin today, I would like to give a brief, because I don't know how familiar you are with the history of Berlin, because I think this is quite important to understand also partly the hype around the creative energy in the city. Because in the 1920s, Berlin was quite the cultural capital of Europe already. So, for example, you had strong artist movements like the Neue Sachlichkeit, New Sobriety. Neue Sachlichkeit. Sobriety, yes, thing. The Berliner Secession, so you had people like Otto Dix, you had George Cross, you had like Käthe Kollwitz. So many artists who really were part of a movement, so to say. And then, of course, as we all know, the end came with World War II. And then after 1961, when the wall was built, it was a very isolated situation for West Berlin. And when we talk about Berlin today, one has to always remind that we mostly talk about the cultural history of West Berlin today. We're not talking about the cultural history of East Berlin today, besides architecture. And in this respect, so when the wall was built, West Berlin was isolated. It was a kind of laboratory for arts, creative people, because most of the people from especially West Germany came when they didn't want to go to the military service, so they all came to West Berlin because there were special laws there, so you didn't need to go to the military service, etc. So it was a kind of a laboratory. It mainly was also culturally very isolated, because like the strong art market, or because one of the first art fairs which was founded in Europe was in Cologne in the 1960s. So the whole concentration of the art market was actually in Cologne and around Cologne, and it still is today. So, of course, many people came, as we know, and programs like the DAAD were bringing people, and so there was a certain way of exchange, but still it was isolated. With 1989, the whole situation changed. And of course, one reason why it changed was that like East Berlin was quite abundant. I mean, most of the housing departments were quite let's say, rotten, so it was cheap to be there, and it opened up the situation. And and with the 90s it all began, especially in Berlin Mitte, as you might know, where so the hype was founded, more or less. But it also was founded mostly by galleries who kind of opened, like you probably know Icon and Art by Judy Lübke. He came from East Germany, who had already been a gallerist in East Berlin for many years. There was Friedrich Luck, also from East Berlin, creating Wohnmaschine. You had Bruno Brunett, Nicole Hackert, which founded Contemporary Fine Art, so kind of big name galleries, the first generation of artists coming, like Mese, etc. So, and that was the 90s, and of course all of a sudden there was a situation that many people came, and it felt like a great situation where you could do anything. I mean, also when you look back to the 90s in Berlin, you had a very strong club scene, so everything was possible, and it was kind of a very, you could try, and this is actually what is Berlin still about today. It is about networks. So Berlin is the place to be, because you find very strong, very various kinds of networks. So why people still do like to come to Berlin is about the networks, culture there. Because in a way it is a very low hierarchy. It is to find people, you create networks or collectives to work with, to create spaces, you try to experiment with what you think art is for you. So, and this is still today. So if you look, you have like over 400 galleries in Berlin. Today you have 150 off spaces, so you have like a real culture of off spaces. And of course you have not as many, like let's say, highly profiled institutions as here. I would totally agree, this is a difference. And then you look, you have contemporary art institution, of course, also founded in the 90s as the Kunstwerke. It was a farmer's quartered place, and then later it was founded as the Kunstwerke, so it's one of the major contemporary art institutions in Berlin today. It's also holding the Berlin Biennial, which was also part of this kind of creative movement to found the Berlin Biennial by Klaus Biesenbach. So today it became an institution, but in the first 3 times Berlin Biennial was happening, it was quite underfinanced, and it was more like a self-organized institution, even though it was very representative. And with that, I mean, so this kind of, and that's I think why people still like to be in Berlin. There was also, let's say, until maybe 5 years ago, you could say that you would still find cheap places to live. This was also a big argument. Today, it is not true anymore, as we all know. And also, it is in a way not true, and I will gonna come back to this later, that the income you make as an artist in Berlin is very low. So in a way, why people said it is cheap, it is compared with other cities like New York, London. I mean, it's always the question with what do you compare yourself? And if you compare with this, as you say, we could say it's cheap. But in a way, it's not cheap when you make your money in Berlin. Then you are actually fucked up in a way. Or you can be easily fucked up, to be honest. So today, the situation is like you have so-called 20,000 creative people. And I would say there's a strong change of within this, what is, like when they say there's an artist hype, I would say yes, it was especially in the 90s and in the early 2000 years, but today it's more like there is a certain way of a creative economy coming up into the city, which kind of changes the perspective as well. It's not only about artists anymore. Of course, still it is, so you have like 5,000 artists, it's one number, the numbers are changing, so let's say it's 5,000 artists, you have in those 400 galleries, 6,000 artists represented, which is like 25% of them are international. And from those like 5,000 artists, 1,000 really can make a living in Berlin by selling their art. And this is the downer, so to be honest, so this is the truth about Berlin in terms of our art market, because there is no such thing as an art market, and especially there's also no secondary market, which means it's most of the, if artists sell like about around 38%, they selling right from their studio, not from the gallery. It's only 9% who sell their artworks from the gallery, which is like, again, it's also kind of brings a certain idea of how we think about Berlin, but still, of course, not too long? Yeah, that's good. No. So now I study sociology, so I love statistics, so I'm going to give some other numbers to make it, like from those, let's say 5,000 artists, there's only, the average has like about 3 solo shows a year where you will have only 50% in Berlin. So in a way, the off-space culture came also because of the way of to find spaces to exhibit, because